Rights Act was one of the crowning achievements of our democracy, the result of Republican and Democratic efforts. President Reagan signed its renewal when he was in office. President George W. Bush signed its renewal when he was in office. 100 members of Congress have come here today to honor people who are willing to die for the right to protect it. If we want to honor this day, let that 100 go back to Washington and gather 400 more, and together pledge to make it their mission to restore that law this year.
That was President Obama delivering remarks on the 50th anniversary of the marches in Selma, Alabama. Dwayne Wickham was in Selma remembering the heroes that marched for voting rights. And later, Ambassador Daniel Speckard from Lutheran World Relief tells us about their global efforts to rebuild lives around the world. I'm Sarah Caldwell. All this and more on this edition of 11 TV Health.
Their faith was questioned. Their lives were threatened. Their patriotism challenged. And yet, what could be more American than what happened in this place?
That was President Obama, of course, delivering remarks at the 50th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday March in Selma, Alabama. Dwayne Wickham was there, and he joins us today to tell us about his experience. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
So fresh off that experience, tell us what it was like.
You know, I used to watch a show called You Are There, and it would take you back to some historic event. Well, this is what this flight on Air Force One did for me. To travel with this nation's first black president to the heart of Dixie, to the scene of one of the most egregious confrontations that occurred during the Civil Rights era, and to celebrate the result of that event, which was the passing of the Voting Rights Act. It was really very heartwarming.
It had to be. And you mentioned the flight, which is remarkable in itself. How did that invitation come about, and what was it like to be there with him?
Well, I don't know how it came about, except to say that 3 days before the flight, I had received an email from the White House saying to me that they wanted me to be a part of the team that would go on the plane and interview the president and travel with him to Selma. There were only 5 of us who were invited to sit in the special section of the plane that is designated for the president's invited guest. And it was really a very thrilling moment. I mean, just to be there to see what is in fact the White House on the move. You know, when the president is on Air Force One and the Air Force One is airborne, that's the White House.
Yeah, the traveling White House.
Yes.
So your reflections of your time leading up to it, first, what was your response to be invited?
Well, I said what every journalist ought to say. When, where, I'll be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm there. And was it difficult to come up with, you know, a list of questions for the President of the United States?
Well, you know, before there was a second email. So there was some, maybe a day and a half between the invitation and the details of the travel.
Okay.
And so, yes, I'm readying myself. I'm plunging into all kinds of research. What do I want to talk to him about? I wanted to make sure I knew everything I could about Selma. I even ordered a book about Air Force One.
Did you?
From Amazon. Came the next day. And so I'm really immersing myself. And then I received this email that says, one question. Probably you'll get in one question each. It's 5 journalists. You'll have maybe 20 minutes with him. Actually, we ended up with 40 minutes with the president in his conference room on Air Force One. But by the time we each asked one question and he answered those questions, 40 minutes had expired, and we were literally landing at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama.
Wow, so it went quickly.
Yes.
What did you ask him? I'm sure people want to know.
Well, I asked him about something that Dr. King had said in the first March on Washington. Most people don't remember that. The first March on Washington, 1957, the president stood, Dr. King stood then at the Lincoln Memorial, and he said, give us the vote. Give us the vote and we will help change America for the better. And so I said, Mr. President, we received the vote in 1965. America has changed for the better. But there have been recent Supreme Court decisions that threaten some portions of the Voting Rights Act. Are you concerned, worried at all, that they may not, those changes may not now be sustainable?
And what was his response?
He said he's very concerned. He's very concerned. He wants to see legislation passed that will reinstate a portion of the Voting Rights Act, which was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, which basically said that some jurisdictions that previously had been found to have discriminated in offering voting rights to blacks and other minorities would have to get pre-approval for any new changes. The pre-approval is now gone. They now can institute the changes, and if bad things happen, we can later try to resolve them. But of course, then the results of the elections are already posted. So he wants to get that rolled back, and there seems to be some opposition. Senator John Cornyn of Texas, has recently said he sees no need to do this. So we'll see how it turns out.
Okay. Now, you talked about just approaching this from a journalistic standpoint and the research that went into it. Was there part of you that was also kind of separate from the journalist in you, in awe at this experience, not only being with the president, but actually reliving the Selma, Alabama experience with him?
Yeah, you know, when President Obama was elected, well, actually, when he was nominated in 2008, I was in Denver. And I remember saying to a friend that the great challenge for black journalists, especially, should he win, would be not to become lapdogs, but to be watchdogs. That's the great challenge for all journalists, but maybe particularly for black journalists because of the uniqueness of the moment. And so, you know, I'm sitting there, I'm torn. It's a historical moment. He's the first black president. You know, he said something to us on the plane. He said, there is now a generation of young people born during my time in office who have never known a president who was not black. And so that was a very exciting thought for me. I suspect there probably won't be another black president for an awful long time, given some of the reactions we've seen to his presidency. And so it was a special moment for that reason. But it was also a special moment for me as a journalist to be so close to the President of the United States, the most powerful chief executive in the world, and to have an opportunity, as I've had on many occasions over the past 6 years, to talk to him and to take my measure of him up close and personal.
Were you able to get a sense at all of how moved he was by this experience, you know, touching down in Selma, Alabama, and being with so many people who either experienced it or were there to just take a piece of history?
I am increasingly struck by his presence in the moment. He almost seems to stand above people around him. We get a little giddy, a little nervous, and he always seems to have taken proper measure of where he is. I'm not sure that maybe that's not different from any other president. That may be a unique characteristic of chief executives, but I certainly noticed it in him. So he wasn't he wasn't in a hand-clapping mode. In fact, he said to us, he said, "This moment is not special because of me." He said, "This moment is special," he said, "because of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's special because of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which ended slavery, made black citizens, gave blacks the right to vote." He said it's special because of the Voting Rights Act and the other civil rights legislation of the 1960s. Don't make it special because of me.
I like that. Interesting. Let's talk more about your experience at Selma. Of course, we're going to be continuing the conversation with you coming up, but just what struck you about it and how much change you think we've seen?
Well, let me say, when we landed at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery. Off of Air Force One, they put us on Marine Corps helicopters and then transported us over to Craig Field, just on the edge of Selma, where there was a presidential motorcade, in which I've never ridden before. And so then they put us in the presidential motorcade, and now we have to traverse the land from the airport to Selma. And it's a rural section of Alabama, and the roadway is lined with black people. I mean, literally, you don't see very many homes, so they've come from, I guess, the farms and the small shanties and homes that are in close proximity, but they literally line the roadway. And they are waving as though something much bigger than I thought this event would be was taking place.